Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of my analysis of the TTArtisan F6.3 prime lens. It retails for between £300 and £400 and it's a significantly a lot cheaper than my RF 100-500 7.1 lens, which cost me £2,500. So there's a massive price difference here, and if you can live with manual focus and no image stabilization, then this might be the lens for you. Is it as sharp and as fantastically good as the RF 100-500? Not quite, but it's not far off. And in some respects, in the corners, it's actually a little bit better. However, contrast does take a hit with this lens. So basically, it's got 12 aperture blades, 2 UD elements, and 2 index elements. I think it's 8 elements in 5 groups, and it's not bad for the price. So we're going to have a look at image quality, test it out, and see if it's half decent in terms of image quality. And then, you know, what I'll do in the third part of the video is we'll go out in the real world and take some test images, and I'll show you those afterwards. But it's not bad of a lens in terms of what it offers, and there's nothing out there that can compete with it for price at its price point. But there are other options I would probably recommend, such as the Sigma Contemporary or Sport 150-600s, or the Tamrons. Tamron and Sigma both do a 100-400 EF lens you could adapt quite easily. Obviously there's the RF 100-400 lens, which I would highly recommend. Obviously it's f8 at its 400mm end. And there's many other options out there in the EF world as well, such as the 100-400 Mark II, which is a very popular L lens, and you can pick those up at a bargain, you know, used these days, and there's lots of them available because everyone's obviously going to RF, and that's the thing with EF glass. EF glass has come down in price hugely because of RF glass. So in terms of what Canon has been doing is restricting companies from making autofocus lenses. However, there's a lot of companies out there that are making RF manual focus lenses because they can do that, because Canon isn't that bothered about non-autofocus lenses being introduced into their RF mount. And I'm hoping that at some point Canon will relent on that. There's rumours circulating that Sigma have been given the go-ahead, but there's no concrete evidence or proof or definitive answer to that actually happening. So despite what a lot of YouTubers have been saying, take it with a pinch of salt. Unless you hear it from Canon directly, it's probably not true. Anyway, hopefully you'll enjoy the test that I've done. Please bear with me in terms of the test charts. I know it can be a bit boring listening to me and showing you the examples, but I think it's important to see the examples for yourself, rather than just listen to people who claim many things but don't show you the results. Anyway, let's get to the video, and thanks for watching. Remember to like the video and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. I need some more subscribers, so if you do like the content, you do enjoy the things I do, please subscribe. A lot of people watch the content but don't subscribe, and it would help me out get to that magical 1,000 subscribers. I would appreciate that. And even if you don't subscribe, like the video. I would appreciate that at the very least. It makes this video more popular and easier to find for other people that are looking at a video like this, and it gets presented to them by YouTube if a lot of people like it. Anyway, let's get to the examples. Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. We're going to start looking at image quality on the two lenses. That is the Canon 100-400 RF L lens 7.1, and obviously the TTArtisan 500mm f6.3 prime lens. For the sake of the video, I'll refer to the Artisan lens as the TT lens and the Canon as the Canon lens, just to make this a lot quicker. So let's have a look at this Canon image that we've got of the lens test chart. and I'm just going to zoom in there so you guys can see the sharpness quality at 100%. And as expected, the Canon lens does show good detail, no major problems there. So let's have a look at the Ariston lens. Obviously you can tell it's a bit more zoomed in, so that would indicate to me, just like the EF 100-400 Mark II L lens, it was closer to 370mm. I think the same is true of the 100-500 RF lens. It's probably closer to something like 480mm. Anyway, without further ado, let's just zoom in there at 100% so you can see the quality. And obviously both images look really good. I don't think there's any major problems. Crispness is great. The only thing I think is lacking is a bit of contrast in the TT lens, but apart from that, I think that both showing good results. So let's move on to the Canon lens at f8 and zoom in there, and you can see the detail there. Again, showing good level of detail, no major problems as I can see. So have a look at the TT lens at f8, zoom in there 100%, again showing good detail, and both are giving us good results. So this cheap lens that Ariston have brought out isn't producing terrible results because it's a lot cheaper. It's producing good results. So that's something we can say, despite the fact it has a minimum focus of 3.3 meters, while the Canon lens can focus a lot closer. I think it's 1.2 meters at 500mm on the lens. So obviously it's showing us good detail at f8 on the TT lens. Let's have a look at f16. Zoom in there 100%, again showing good detail. I'm not seeing any sort of issue with diffraction on the Canon lens. Let's have a look at the TT lens. It seems a tad bit softer than the f8 version of obviously this picture, and that sort of could indicate a slight amount of diffraction coming into the image. What is diffraction, you might be wondering? It's just basically when you start stopping the aperture down a lot, it starts to make your images a bit softer rather than sharper. Normally, like if you go from f6.3 to f8, you'd expect the f8 image to be a tiny bit sharper, and then you can stop it down to f16 to try and get more depth of field. That's the whole point of stopping down the lens. But sometimes you can only go so far before you start off introducing softness into your image. So both are doing good. However, something did surprise me when I started looking at the images here. So this is the Canon at f8. Now, if we come down here and zoom into these boxes, now all these boxes here have a pattern in, and you should be able to tell that you can't see that pattern detail there. And this was true of the EF 100-400. Again, it didn't show the detail in these boxes. However, when I started taking pictures with the Sigma Sport and Contemporary and Tamron, it did show pattern detail in there. So when we get the TT lens and have a look in there, I was quite surprised. Obviously it's cut off some of it, but hopefully you'll be able to see this. But there, can you see that, guys? I can actually see a pattern in there, which sort of indicates to me that the TT lens is quite good in the corners. Now, this is one of my criticisms with the RF Canon lens, zoom lenses, is they're not that sharp in the corners. And the same was true of the EF lenses. They were not that sharp in the corners either. But if we have a look at this pattern detail here, clearly you can see good pattern detail. But if I go back to the 100-500 lens and we do the same thing and we zoom in there at I think we're at 500% there, and that's at 400% on the TT lens. But we've got some comparison there. But what you can see is, while there is some pattern detail in these circles, it's there are gaps in the pattern detail, and when I look at the TT lens, you can see that pattern all the way around. One thing I have noticed is you can clearly see some chromatic aberration in the TT lens that's showing up. You know, against the white here, you can see like a purple fringing, and that's more noticeable when I go further down over here to these boxes here. What I can see is some colour fringing at the bottom part of these black boxes, these checker boxes. So obviously you can see we're getting chromatic aberration coming into the actual TT lens, while if I go to the RF 100 to 500 lens and look in those same boxes over here, hopefully it's the bottom part of the screen, I can't see any sort of chromatic aberration at the bottom of these checkered boxes. So I think both lenses are doing a good job. So what I'm sort of seeing is the prime lens is actually reproducing a tiny bit more detail in certain places. However, there is chromatic aberration. Now this is obviously test charts. Doesn't always translate to real world images. So obviously I'll show you that in another video. Right, ladies and gentlemen, so this is the R7 APS-C test using the Canon 100 to 500 RF lens versus the TT500 6.3 Ariston lens. So obviously we've looked at the R6 results, which is full frame. Now I want to have a look at APS-C and see how the APS-C does on both lenses. So without further ado, let's have a look at the Canon 100 to 500. Remember, it's 7.1 is the lowest aperture we can get out of the Canon lens, where we got 6.3 on the TT lens. So let's have a look at sharpness and see what we can see really. So let's just zoom in here into 200%, and we can see the results that we're getting, and it looks pretty decent on the Canon side. So let's have a look at the TT lens. Obviously the darker aperture has changed the exposure a little bit, so I do apologise for that, but hopefully you can see here. Let's go in there, 100%, gives us similar parity, and that's the results that we're getting from the TT lens. Let's have a look at the Canon 100 to 500 at f8 on the R7, and let's go into there at 100%, and that's the results that's been showed there. Let's move to the TT lens at f8 and zoom in there at 100%, and you can see we're getting good detail from both lenses. And let's have a look at the 100 to 500 at 100% there, F16, again showing good detail, no obvious signs of diffraction. And let's zoom in here at 100% on the TT lens. Again, we've got a good showing. I think both lenses are doing well on the APS-C. However, I did notice that it did seem to me to be a bit softer than the Canon lens when I put APS-C on, when I started looking at real world images. So if we just move this over a little bit so you can see the circle, and then hopefully it'll give us a really good indication on sharpness. So I hope these videos are informative and helpful at looking at image quality. I know lens test charts can be boring to look at, but I do think they are beneficial at telling you how sharp a lens can be. So let's just look at the Canon at 7.1 again showing good detail and no obvious signs of chromatic aberration. Let's have a look at the TT lens at 6.3. Again, looks good. If you're noticing why it looks whiter on the TT lens, I just think the Canon reproduces colours better. It's that simple. And I think you're getting better contrast from the Canon lens in that respect. But I'm just trying to look at image quality in these tests. So let's have a look at the Canon 100 to 500 at f8, reproducing good results, as you can see there. Let's have a look at the TT lens. Again, I think it's not too bad. However, it could be sharper. Let's have a look at F16 on the Canon lens. Again, looks good. And then look at the TT lens at F16. Just tad bit softer than what I think the Canon lens is. It just looks, the edges of this cross just looks a bit better than it does on the TT lens. I do prefer the colour on the Canon lens versus the TT lens. However, as shown in the full frame examples, I do think we're getting some better detail in the corners than the Canon lens is reproducing, which was a big surprise for me. I expected the Canon lens to completely blow this manual focus lens away, and it does seem to be not quite as sharp in the corners or the outer edges than this prime is. But that is to be expected, to be honest with you. Primes are always going to be slightly better than zooms anyway. So that's why some people gravitate to primes over zooms, because they want that edge-to-edge sharpness, where zooms, the main sharpness comes from the central part of the image of the image rather than the entirety. Anyway, hope that was informative. On the TTArtisan F6.3 lens, I've stopped it down to f8. I've done the same on the Canon RF 100 to 500, so all images are f8 on the R6 20 megapixel camera. And I wanted to have a look at detail. So I've got this robin, and I took a picture of it with the TT lens, and it looks pretty decent actually, not bad at all. So let's just have a look at the Canon. Obviously good detail as well, no major problems there. I think it's really nice. But let's just zoom in there a little bit on the Canon at 200% and do the same on the TT lens at 200%. So let's put them side by side. To me, it just seems to me like the Canon is a tad bit sharper, as you can see. But, you know, considering this lens only cost me £410, I think it's doing a reasonably good job. The bokeh isn't bad either if you look at both lenses. So that's the Canon and that's the TT lens, both doing a good job. Let me know in the comments what you think, and please remember, and don't forget to smash that like button and put some comments in if this video is helpful. So let's go back to the TT lens. I took a picture of my Olympus camera here that I've had for a long time. It's a OM10 if you were wondering. So that's the image we're getting reproduced by the TT lens. Let's have a look at the Canon RF lens, and obviously it looks nice. Both are reproducing good results. You know, I tried my best with the manual focus to try and get the focus dead on. It's not easy though, even being relatively close to make sure it's in focus. But that's the TT lens at f8, and that's the Canon lens at f8. But let's just zoom in there at 200%, and it's so sharp, the RF lens in the center, that you can actually see the dust particles above it on the actual Olympus camera. Let's have a look at the TT lens, and let's zoom in there to 200%. Again, we're seeing detail in this. it's not quite as sharp as you can clearly see. It just seems to be more contrast, more punchier in the RF lens versus the TT lens, but nevertheless we can still see some of that dust particles there, but obviously you can see more of it, and it does look sharper on the 100 to 500 lens. You know, if we have a look at the image in general, you know, I can't really make out much chromatic aberration at all. If we have a look here, you may not be able to see it in the video, but in this wording here, manual adapter, I can see a slight pink tinge in the white. So I do think there's a little bit chromatic aberration. I have turned chromatic aberration camera corrections off because I like to see what both lenses can achieve without corrections in camera. So obviously that's the TT lens and that's the Canon 100 to 500. Both images are acceptable, however I do prefer the Canon lens quality. So another picture, I took a picture of one of the bears, and I was trying my best to nail focus. It was not easy at all because there's so much here to try and get in focus, and obviously F8, even F8 isn't good enough in terms of depth of field to get everything in focus. Let's have a look at how the Canon one looks, and to be honest I like it better and more of it is in focus. So I don't know if this was a focusing issue with myself or not, because that's always a possibility with a manual focus lens. You can always miss focus slightly. At the end of the day, the focusing system on the lenses and the cameras are better than our naked eyes nowadays. Wasn't the case years ago, but now I think they are certainly outstanding in terms of autofocus performance. Well, let's just zoom in there 100% so you can see the bear. Looks nice, and focus does look like it's on the eye there. Let's have a look at the TT lens. I do seem to have missed focus here, unfortunately, so it could have been error on my part. So let's move on to the next image. So here is a toffee jar. I thought this would be an interesting thing to photograph. This is the TT lens at f8 again. Looks nice, good detail, and I do seem to have nailed focus on that. I do like it and it looks good. Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think that's a nice photo? Again, on the Canon 100 to 500, looks nice and sharp and certainly great. You can even see like particles in the jar there. Let's see if we can see that in the TT lens, and we can. Let's just zoom in there 100%. It looks fairly good, and zoom in 100% on the Canon. I do think we're getting better contrast on the Canon, and on the TT lens I think it's pretty good as well. I'd give it a slight edge to the Canon, to be honest with you, but they're very close. So those are some real world images. Hope you like those. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I thought I'd do a test using this model I've got of the USS Defiant, a starship from Star Trek. I've got quite a few of these models and I do find them quite useful for testing sharpness on lenses. So I thought I would do a comparison between obviously the TT lens versus the RF 100 to 500, and we'll have a look at sharpness, and obviously it was quite revealing doing this little test. So here we have the Canon lens at 7.1, and clearly you can see it's pretty nicely sharp and showing good detail, no major problems there. Then I'll look at the TT lens at f6.3, and I don't know whether it was a combination of me missing focus, but it didn't look very sharp. And I did try a few times, and I didn't seem to get any better results, to be honest with you. So let's go to the Canon 100-500 at f8. Again, good showing of detail, no major problems, looks nice. Let's have a look at the TT lens at f8. It looks better, but it doesn't quite look at sharp. Now, is it user error possibly because I didn't nail the focus completely perfectly? Possibly. Again, it's an R6 full frame, 20 megapixel sensor. But again, I'm not too happy with the results from the TT lens. So let's move on to the Canon 100-500. Obviously, very nice and sharp, lots of detail. I don't see any problems with the detail there from the 100-500. And let's have a look at the TT lens. It looks a lot better at f16, if I'm honest with you, than it did at f6.3 or f8. So the TT lens, to my eye, seems to get a lot better at f16. But let's go back to the beginning and zoom in to 100%. Well, that's 200%, sorry. So you can see the detail that you're getting from 7.1 on the Canon lens. Let's have a look at the TT lens at 200%. So you can see that better in the video. As you can see, it doesn't look very great, does it? Let's move on to the f8 image of the Canon lens. Zoom in there, 200%. Again, good detail, not too bad there. And then have a look at the TT lens at f8 as well. 200%. Looks terrible. Could it be user error? Possibly. So let's have a look at the next image. Canon lens at f16, 200%. Looks great, no problems. Looks a tad bit softer than the f8 image, if I'm honest with you, but it's not too bad. And so have a look at the TT lens. When stopped down at f16 is a lot better, but let's just go back to the beginning so you can see a quick comparison. The 100-500 at f7.1, then the TT lens at 6.3, then the Canon lens at f8, the TT lens at f8, then the Canon lens at f16, and then the TT lens at f16. I would say the Canon lens at f16 versus the TT lens are very similar. I don't think there's a problem there. Now, if you're wondering in terms of, is it possible that there was any camera shake or anything like that, on the R6 images, I use my phone as a remote release, and on the R7 images, I used a 10-second timer that's on the camera. So there should be, the only possibility would be shutter shock. Apart from that, shutter speeds did range between 40 to 100th of a second because the amount of light I was using from the light box. But yeah, this is the results of this particular test. Hopefully you find these videos informative. So here we have the R7. I think it's a 32 megapixel sensor, and I'm testing the TT lens versus the Canon 100-500 RF lens. So here we can see the results from the crop sensor, which will give us equivalent focal length of 800 millimeters. And I thought I'd show you the results here. So that's the Canon 100-500 at 7.1. And the next one is the TT lens at f6.3. It does look a little bit softer, but nevertheless it's not doing too bad of a job. So have a look at the Canon 100-500 image at f8. Looks nice and sharp, good amount of detail, nice contrast, no problems. Let's have a look at the TT lens. Again, it just seemed to be a slight lack of contrast there. and I do think it's a bit on the soft side as well at f8. I don't think the TT lens does very well with APS-C on it, if I'm honest with you. However, let's have a look at the next image, the Canon 100 to 500 at f16. Nice and sharp, good detail, looks nice. And let's have a look at the TT lens. And I think the TT lens has come back to life at f16 on APS-C, as you can see there. So let's just go back to the beginning so you can see comparison. So the Canon lens, the TT lens at 6.3, the Canon lens at f8, TT lens at f8, the Canon lens at f16, and the TT lens at f16. So there is a bit of a mixed bag of results, as you can see in these tests. But I do think the Ariston lens is useful, and as long as you realise its limitations. But I do think that minimum focus of 3.3 meters can be a bit of a challenge, considering the likes of Sigma and Tamron have focusing minimum focus a lot less than that. Like the contemporary is 2.8 meters to sport, 2.6 meters, and I think it's 2.2 meters with the G2 Tamron lens. And there are other offerings out there with Canon, such as the RF100 to 400. I think it's a better option than the Ariston lens, if I'm honest with you. And obviously there's I think Sigma do a 100 to 400 as well, which I think Dustin Abbott reviewed, and that was a bit sharper than the Canon 100 to 400 EF Mark II lens. So there are other options in this Ariston lens. I think the price is attractive, where you can purchase it for under £300 or $300. And there's not much out there that can beat that on price, if I'm honest with you. There's hardly anything that can touch that on price. But I do think we are getting some good results here. So again, that's the Canon lens, that's the TT lens, the Canon lens, TT lens, Canon lens, TT lens. This is APS-C, remember, on the R7, but let's just crop that in at 100% on all of these images so you guys can see it a bit better on the YouTube, because I know sometimes the YouTube does have a habit of cropping things. So let's just zoom in there 100% on all these images, and I'll just go through them one more time. So that's the Canon lens at 7.1, cropped in at 100%. That's the TT lens at 6.3, cropped in 100%. That's the Canon lens at f8, cropped in 100%. That's the TT lens cropped in 100% at f8. And then that's the Canon lens at f16, cropped in 100% on APS-C. And then that's the TT lens cropped in 100%. I think the TT lens comes back to life on APS-C at f16. I don't like it at f8 or f6.3. So hopefully that was helpful as well. So ladies and gentlemen, I thought I would revisit doing some more tests indoors on the Ariston TT 6.3 lens versus the Canon RF100 to 500 7.1 L lens, as I wanted to have a look at detail again and compare them obviously on the R6 and the R7, and I wanted to redo some of the tests again to try and determine how sharp these lenses are. Obviously the benchmark is going to be the 100 to 500 in terms of central sharpness. However, I was pleasantly surprised by the TT lens being quite sharp, in fact probably sharper in the corners. However, we do have chromatic aberration to contend with. So without further ado, let's just have a look at the samples that we've got here. So I found, obviously you'd be familiar with this Starship, the Enterprise, the the NCC 1701A, the refit version, and I thought I'd get one of my models out and we'd have a look and see how sharp it is. Obviously you can see the background there is one of those Star Trek box sets, so you can have a look at the detail there as well. And I thought it'd be interesting to see sharpness in these images. So what we've got is obviously the 100 to 500 there on the R6. Here we have the same image on the TT lens, and then we've got the Canon 100 to 500 on an APS-C R7. Obviously it's full frame R6 and R7 cameras that we're using, and the R7 obviously is a 32 megapixel crop sensor versus a 20 megapixel full frame, and then obviously a TT version of that as well, and both look really good. In fact, I'm pleasantly surprised by the quality, and you know what, for the price I would recommend a TT lens. For me personally, I wouldn't buy it because it doesn't offer me the tracking focus that the R5 and R6 are capable of. For wildlife, I think it's no good in terms of, you know, practical usability. However, if you're happy to take pictures of static subjects from a long distance away, or you're someone who's a private eye, someone doing surveillance, and you don't need high quality images, yeah, I think it'd be more than acceptable for that, and it's a cheap way of getting to 500 millimeters. But without further ado, let's try and dissect these images a little bit. So obviously the Canon lens looks fantastically sharp and brilliant, and the contrast and the colours just punch out and say, look at me, I'm great, and yeah, I like it, nice. And that's the R6. The TT lens looks pretty decent as well. It just looks a tad bit softer, not as punchy. And let's have a look at the Canon lens on the R7. Again, looks brilliant detail. You can clearly see the text of the USS Enterprise there in black, and you can actually read that quite clearly, and it just looks overall brilliantly sharp. And then the APS-C image here, while you can make out the text and you can see it, it's just not got that crispness that the RF lens has. So let's go back to our full frame image, and let's zoom in there and have a look at the crispness of the dish. So we're at 200% there, and you can see we've got good detail. You can even make out some of the pits in the metal on the model, which is good in the Canon lens. Let's have a look at the TT lens. Obviously we need to zoom in a bit more. 200% again. Looks good, just not quite as sharp. So let's go back to the Canon, and then you look at the TT lens. Are they similar? Yeah. Are they reasonably sharp? Yes. I just think, to me, the Canon lens pops out more. So that's the Canon, that's the TT lens. So let's have a look at the APS-C images we've got here. Obviously, that's the R7 on the Canon, and that's the TT lens on the R7. So that's your differences there. So that's the Canon, that's the TT lens. So let's crop that in a little bit more so we can see more of it, which we're at 100%, giving us similar sort of visual appearance to what we got with a full frame at 200%. And it looks really good and good detail. And if you're wondering, you can make out some little hairs on the model. That's just basically particles of dust. And on the Canon lens, you can make them out really well. They're very crisp. Let's have a look at the TT lens, and let's zoom in there 100%. So 100% there. Those strands of dust that I mentioned that look like hairs are not as crisp, and so is the text. The text isn't as crisp. So let's just go back to the Canon one. Canon one just pops out and says, look at me, I'm sharp. The TT lens just looks a tad bit softer, and also it doesn't seem to reproduce the colours as well as the Canon lens. So let's just go back just to the beginning. Obviously this is the R6 image, which has been cropped in at 200% on the Canon lens. This is on the R6 on the TT lens, again cropped at 200%. As you can see, it's not quite as sharp. Then we'll look at the Canon lens on the R7, cropped in at 100%. Looks really nice. I would be happy to print that out as it is. And let's have a look at the TT lens on the R7 on the 500mm 6.3 Ariston lens, and it doesn't look quite as sharp. So looking at these examples, hopefully it was informative to give you an idea on sharpness. I will be going out in the field and doing a real world test separate to this video, for you purists that like real world examples rather than test images indoors. You know, so hopefully you found this informative. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope that these examples were helpful. This is part 2. Obviously I will be doing a part 3 and doing some real world tests for you guys outside when the weather gets better. It's been quite miserable recently. For me, it's a good lens to have. It does a good job. It fits a niche, I think, for those that like manual focus. And there's nothing wrong with using manual focus lenses and challenging yourself to use manual focus. But many autofocus lenses these days have the facility to do manual focus. So that's nothing really new in that respect. I think what it comes down to is having the tracking capabilities of the R6, R7, R5, R3, and you can't use that on this lens. And for me, that's the reason for me not wanting to keep this and use it. And also I thought that the tripod collar was a bit flimsy, and obviously the lens hood was a bit short, and I think that's a bit silly. They should have made it a lot longer. It wouldn't have cost much to make the lens hood, you know, about 3 inches long instead of maybe 1 inch long. But apart from that, it's not a bad lens for the money. There are other options out there that I would recommend though, such as the Sigma Contemporary and Sport and Tamron G2. Those can be adapted quite well on the RF cameras, such as the R6, R7, R5, R3, and soon to be released R1. There's other options such as the RF 100 to 400, which is a good lens in itself and has autofocus, obviously. There's other options that might be better fit for you than this lens. But at the price point, it's really hard to beat. So it's something to keep in mind. So I just want to say a big thank you for those of you who have come to the video. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you do like the content. I'll be coming out with a part 3 in the coming week, and I'll show you some real world examples. But I felt it's a good idea to show you indoor images as well, at a shorter distance, so where the atmosphere isn't affecting the images, so you can get a grasp on how sharp this lens is. Anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for being patient and watching the whole entirety of the video as well. And I'll see you in the next one when I go out and about and test this out to its proper capabilities. And thanks for watching. Bye bye.